Hello again. Today I want to talk to you about how to write a great opening sentence. This is, in my opinion, really important. Because if your opening sentence is not up to scratch, your reader will probably put the book down and not continue. So it's of vital importance that your opening sentence and even really opening paragraph is intriguing to the reader, that it hooks the reader in some ways. I'm just going to look at the opening sentence today. The paragraph is a larger thing. There are many ways that one can kind of hook the reader from the first sentence, and I want to examine some of these, looking at some famous examples. So, firstly, a little bit uncommon nowadays, but the epigram. An epigram, for those who don't know, is a pithy saying or remark, usually expressing an idea in a clever or amusing way. Oscar Wilde was very famous for these. One of his, for example, was, "Some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go." So this can be a good way of opening your novel or short story, because it can act as a thesis statement for the novel as a whole, by immediately and clearly introducing a theme or idea that will be explored in the novel. Some examples: Pride and Prejudice opens this way with, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife." Austen examines this throughout the novel, as well as her titular themes of Pride and Prejudice, and she very clearly introduces this in the first sentence. We as readers now want to know whether this is a truth universally acknowledged, whether it's true at all. Then there's Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. This has the same effect as the Pride and Prejudice opening. Is this true? We want to know. But it also introduces the sort of driving force of the plot, because it does actually follow a number of unhappy families. So we want to know. So we find out throughout the novel whether unhappy families are all unhappy in their own way. And we get to see a glimpse of happiness too in Kitty and Levin's marriage, which, though it has its troubles, is fruitful. So we read on to find out how Tolstoy will justify this opening statement. Another way of opening up your novel is by giving an odd detail which either just catches the reader by surprise or provokes a question. It can also help to set a mood. So, very famous example from 1984 by George Orwell. "It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. So we wonder, why is the clock striking 13? It kind of sets up the fact that this world is very strange and backward, and not like our own. Everything's turned upside down. If you think about the themes of the novel, about objective truth, subjective truth, how politics sort of is able to control the thoughts that we have, how they make people think that 2 + 2 = 5, for example. The sentence kind of enacts this on the reader. We start to think, everything's gone pear-shaped, what's going on? As the characters, at least initially, would in the book, and as they do in the book, where they start to question the regime. So we want to read on. We're intrigued. Another one is Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, which opens with the sentence, "You are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night traveller. Now note, this is not the introduction or the foreword or anything like that. This is the first chapter. And so we want to wonder, why is the book telling us that we're reading it? And we have to read on to find out. A more subtle example is Alice Sebold's The Lovely Bones. The first sentence of that novel is, "My name was Salmon, like the fish. First name Susie." This is very subtle because we latch onto the was in that sentence. Why is that not her name anymore? And the very next sentence answers our question. Susie was murdered and is narrating this story from beyond the grave. By the time that we found out this information, we want to read on to find out more. And then finally, Kafka was a master of opening up his stories with an odd detail. Think of the Metamorphosis. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. How did that happen and why? What will happen next? We have to read on to find out. Another way to provide interest is to bring in a fresh, unusual image. It's kind of closely related to an odd detail because it's describing something in an unusual, thought-provoking sort of way, vivid way. So, for example, William Gibson's Neuromancer begins, "The sky above the port was the colour of television, turned to a dead channel." It's a vivid and non-cliché description that makes us want to read on to find out more. Or Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, "A screaming comes across the sky." This is very easy to visualize even though we don't know exactly what it means. One of my favourite authors, Tom Robbins, is incredibly good at this. He does it time and time again. His novel Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates begins, "The naked parrot looked like a human fetus spliced onto a kosher chicken." And there's just so many details in that that make you kind of do a double take and want to read on. Or, lastly, you could sample this from DBC Pierre's Vernon God Little. "It's hot as hell in Martirio, but the papers on the porch are icy with the news." This is obviously very witty, playing on words, and gives a good sense of the mood of the opening scene and the setting of the early part of the novel. So it also is a great example of an opening sentence that introduces a unique voice. And that's going to be the next little element that I look at. Sometimes an opening sentence doesn't really tell us much about the story or the characters. It just introduces a unique voice that makes us want to read on. One of the most famous examples of this is Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, the first sentence of which is, "Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins." As I said, this tells us nothing much about the character narrating the story, Humbert Humbert, or even Lolita, but the language is so heightened and distinctive that it draws us in. We want to know why Humbert is so passionate. And then we find out, and it's kind of disturbing, but we read on. I feel that this technique is most common in novels told in first person, as the more sort of intimate style allows for a more informal voice can be used, creating more variety. Often these sentences are also able to introduce the main character. Think of J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, which goes, "If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all that before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. So Holden Caulfield's voice here is incredibly distinctive. But he also lets us know he's going to tell us a story. And to an extent introduces himself. We get to know a little bit about him. Other examples, we get to know a little bit about him even though he says that he doesn't want to tell us about him. Other examples include Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, which opens, "I am an invisible man." Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, "You don't know about me without you have read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but that ain't no matter." And, of course, "Call me Ishmael" from Moby Dick, which is arguably the single most famous sentence in all of English literature. Certainly one of the most famous. And lastly, you can give the reader a little bit of information, just enough to get them intrigued, a little morsel, which draws them in before, but you don't give them too much. That's how they have to read on to find out more. For example, Ursula Le Guin's The Wizard of Earthsea opens with, "The island of Gaunt, a single mountain that lifts its peak a mile above this storm-wrapped northeast sea, is a land famous for wizards." This is intriguing. We want to know more about the world Le Guin has created. We also might want to know, why is it famous for wizards? What is it about it that seems to breed wizards? Another example is Neil Gaiman's American Gods, which begins with the simple sentence, "Shadow had done 3 years in prison." It's a simple fact that Gaiman tells us here, but it raises questions. Why was he in prison? What sort of name is Shadow? And in naming his character Shadow, we get a sense of his character as well. He's kind of living on the margins and continues to do so throughout the novel. So, as you can see from that example and a few of the other examples I've given here, the best opening sentences will often combine a number of these elements. But as long as you've included one of these, that is, as long as you've used some sort of universal truth at the beginning, which is a bit old-fashioned, but you can do it, the odd detail, or provoking a question, including an odd detail provoking a question, given them a vivid image, introduced a unique narrative voice, or an interesting character right off the bat, or given them a piece of information that makes them intrigued and want to read on. As long as you've done one of these, and done so in a fresh and original way, your reader should, hopefully, be intrigued enough to want to read on. And once you've hooked them, that's half the battle won. But this video is only an introduction. To really get a handle on writing a killer opening, I would highly recommend you go and read your favourite novels, or at least the opening sentences of some of your favourite novels, and figure out why they work, why they hook you. Reading actively and critically in this way, paying attention to the subtle techniques used to create mood, tone, character, is one of the most valuable tools at your disposal. Perhaps the most important tool at your disposal as a writer, apart from peer feedback and actually writing. And I highly, highly suggest that you use it looking at your favourite books as a writer rather than just as a reader looking for entertainment. So yes, that's a little overview of how to write a great opening sentence, in my opinion. If you have any other techniques, ideas, feel free to comment below. Please subscribe and like the video. Subscribe for more content, of course. I release videos every Monday. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook, the links are down there, and join my my Writers Network Facebook page. The link is also down there. You can check out my website as well, ishanmorrisgraywrites.wordpress.com. Until next time, thanks for watching.